Thank you very much for coming out today. The sun's come out right on time. I first want to thank Sarah and Allison for bringing me to campus today. It's actually been really wonderful and a nice introduction to spring to kind of get out of Minneapolis and get out of the hibernation mode I've been in for the last 6 months and get to talk to some of you on campus. I've been asked to prepare just a few brief words on kind of what am seeing in sort of the landscape of scholarly publishing. I've been working in publishing for about 18 years. I essentially started in the kind of 1999 2000 calendar year, and I first began my career in publishing during a time of what I would call conglomeration and uniformity. Independent bookstores were closing or had already closed. The rise of ebooks was set to slay the printed book as we knew it. And academic publishers like the University of Minnesota Press were, for the most part, resting on our laurels, confident of our unquestionable role at the center of scholarly accreditation and gatekeeping. Um, in the last 18 years has just seen a profound change in those dynamics. The chain bookstores are obviously on their way out or having already disappeared from the landscape, with some of their market share returning to resurgent indie book scene, especially in cities like my home, Minneapolis. And some of that market share has gone to Amazon as well, which is increasingly the sort of elephant in the room that we can't help but adapt and accede to their demands. Ebooks haven't slayed the print book. In fact, for a university press like Minnesota, only about 12 to 15% of our sales are ebooks. But something else has arisen to shake the foundations of our industry, the industry of scholarly communication, and that is open access, with its existential questions of why do scholarship and for whom, along with equally fundamental questions of who does the labor and how much does that labor cost. Um, it's a very fraught time, obviously, for both American and British and Canadian, for that matter, universities and institutions of higher education. And while academic publishers are certainly not immune to the sweeping changes affecting higher education, I'm going to sit here and say that it's still a really fun time to be working in academic publishing. As a cohort of university presses who see our primary audience as you all in this room here, we become much more responsive to the needs of our authors and to the ethical demands that our authors make of us. And there's a real sense, I think, that publishers and editors like myself and authors and readers are in this together. We all have shared commitments to cornerstones like tenure and promotion. University presses obviously can't publish everything, though we would very much like to. But we're developing ways of utilizing digital publishing tools to break down the traditional access gates and gatekeeping that university presses used to do. And just to plug for our presentation, tomorrow at 9 a.m., my colleague Terrence Meyer from the press will be sort of giving a test drive for you all of our manifold book publishing platform that we developed with a grant from the Mellon Foundation, which we're releasing for free to the general public. So my hope is that the future of scholarly communication is much more diverse in terms of its models than simply the university press. I'd like to see more institutions, scholarly institutions, libraries, publishing, digitally born projects and scholarship online for open access readership. I just think that the more players we have on the field, the more robust and strenuous our scholarship is going to be, and the more readers we're going to be impacting and reaching with our work. Um, I do want to add a kind of word of caution to this, and that is a sort of strain of conservatism that I've noticed develop over the past few years around tenure and promotion. And I think for those of you working on books, working on first books, working on second books, that will play a role in tenure and promotion for you down the line, I do think that you're going to be pulled in different directions between the goals that an editor like myself might have for your book, and the very real and present anxiety that tenure and promotion brings to the act and to the art of publishing. We can certainly talk more about that during the Q&A process. But I'm here to connect your books to the widest possible audience. I see my role here as helping you translate your disciplinary training and scholarship into a common tongue that's accessible to broader sets of readers. And to that end, I'm very happy to be here and to take part in this conversation.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Thanks everyone for letting me be here to speak today. I do mostly, as Allison said, I do pretty much solely nonfiction. What's interesting is I don't really work with academic presses. My goal is to sell a range of books to what we call the big five publishers, which is HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, and Macmillan. But that does not mean I don't work with academics. I mean, I think what they are all looking for is somebody who is uniquely qualified with a unique expertise to speak about a certain topic. They're an authority, and there's so few of those out there. So when an agent does have a writer who is uniquely qualified to talk about something, that is exactly what publishers want. And my goal as an agent is to develop that material into a book proposal that is as saleable as possible, and to get a large advance so that you can write your book. The types of books I do the entire range of nonfiction. I do illustrated and photography books. I work with journalists who are in demand, but again, they don't offer. You can be a science journalist, but you're not a scientist. So that's why I tend to really be drawn to academics and you can see that market is thriving. I mean, you guys are in huge demand, and if you just kind of look at the New York Times bestseller list, which I glanced at before I came here, and there's three books sitting on the nonfiction bestseller list out of 10. There's Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astrophysicist. He's actually an author at the agency I work at. And this has been sitting, his book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, has been sitting on the bestseller list for 48 weeks. And he's had a lot of books and, to varying degrees of success, but this one has broken him out. There's somebody who kind of came out of nowhere, named Kate Bowler. She's a divinity professor at Duke. She writes a book called Everything Happens for a Reason. That's been on the list for 5 weeks. And then Steven Pinker, who's a Harvard psychology professor, who's written a book called Enlightenment Now. He's written obviously a ton of books, 7 weeks on the bestseller list. And if you look at the paperback list, where things are a little cheaper, there's 6 books out of 10 by maybe 12 or 15 by historians, psychologists, and other PhDs. So the question is, what are they doing that is getting them this readership? And this kind of comes down to who the audience is and what kind of book you want to write, and that really comes down to the proposal process. And this is pretty much what I work on all day with my writers, because all of these books are about the way it's written and who it's being written for. So when you're kind of coming up with your book idea, I always tell people when they're putting together their book idea and we're kind of conjuring up what the proposal will be, you want to be able to identify what the book is, why the book needs to be written, and why you are the one that needs to be writing it. And for people who are academics or expertise or authorities in their area, that third question is obviously a no-brainer, because you're going to write about what you know best. But what you need to ask yourself as an academic or an expert in what you do is why the book needs to be written. And within that question, you're really asking yourself who the audience is. And that's what's going to kind of decide whether your book is for one of these big 5 publishers or whether it's going to be with a smaller academic press. Neither of those things, not one is not better than the other. But if you are looking to kind of land with one of these bigger publishers, then you need to kind of understand how you can take your idea and translate it into the widest possible audience. So going back to those 3 bestsellers that I just mentioned, you have Neil deGrasse Tyson's book. The reason why that's working is obviously because it's small, it's digestible, it's a really small trim size. People can take it anywhere, and it's only, at that trim size, it's 200 pages, which means it's, if it was a normal book, it would be, something like a little over 100 pages. So it's written, obviously, for people who are not astrophysicists and don't want to be astrophysicists. The Enlightenment Now, the Steven Pinker book, is really interesting to look at because he is using his expertise to help people grapple with current events. The subtitle of this book is The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. So he's taking everything he knows, all of the nitty-gritty details of being a cognitive scientist, and he's using it in the service of a subject that everybody wants to know about, which is democracy, global affairs, how we're struggling in the world today. And if you were to ask any of these 50,000 people who have bought that book, they're not buying it because they're cognitive science fans. They're buying it because they want these answers, and he's the only one that can offer it up. He's offering up his expertise in a way that everyone will start to understand. So what you can see from these books is that these writers have gone really big. They're not inside their own discipline. They're blowing it up into a place where everybody will want to read it because it does pretty much 3 things. It tells readers about their world, it tells readers about themselves as humans, and it tells readers about each other. And these are really essentially at very base level, all people want to know. That's all they really want when they open up a book, is how they can either learn about themselves, the world, or their other human beings around them. So from where, when I'm talking to writers who are interested in turning their book into a larger book that can go to a trade publisher, it's really about understanding the marketplace, studying the bestseller list, reading these books, seeing how it's working, seeing how these professors are making it work, and then using your skills to craft the most creative and valuable book idea. So if you can do that, and then I think you can have a pretty successful book, and I hope that I can help some of you in that general direction. That's it.
All right, we got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Conversation, discussions, questions?
I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, your tenure and promotion book is your work has to be legible to people in your discipline. You have to show that you've been trained and that you have something new to offer your field and your discipline. I do think that academic authors, are often given a choice, or they're told that they have a choice between either writing a book that contributes to your field, or writing a book that's of interest to a general interest readership. And I actually think that's a false choice. And that's something I've been talking to authors who I've met with one-on-one today. I think obviously it takes an impressive amount of skill and style to write for a general interest audience, but you can write, in my opinion, and we have different definitions of what successful is, but I think you can write a successful nonfiction book that goes through some difficult scholarly terrain but does so in a way that kind of holds the hand of the general interest reader and lets them know why you're doing that, why you're going into theory, what the purpose is of it, and depending on the topic that you're writing about, you can still expect a general interest readership for that. And I'll kind of give an example. I published a few books on autism research. Autism is has a community of caregivers, a lot of them parents of autistic children, who, in my opinion, voraciously read and discuss a lot of books that are relevant to the condition that their children have, and they have a sophistication, and they will read a dense scholarly book in order to pick out pieces of information that are relevant to their lives. So I think depending on the topic that you're working in, I do think it's possible to write a book that's scholarly sound for your discipline, and that also communicates, beyond the academy.
Yeah, I mean, you're not, if you're writing for tenure, chances are you don't you don't want an agent. I mean, because we're gonna take 15% and, it's like, it's not, but when you're ready to move on, and adapt it or think bigger, that's, and all these people that I mentioned did that at one point. So. It's mostly, besides changing kind of your frame of mind by thinking about writing outside of, your fellow academics and people who understand on a very intimate level what you're saying, it's kind of also shifting your writing style into a less dense, more conversational, introducing more anecdotes. That's something that I work with all the time. I mean, I have a lot of writers who are shifting over from the academic world. They might not be, deep in tenure mode. They might be like just data analysts, and they were working with Duke or something, and they're embroiled in this language that is going to glaze people's eyes over. But they have an idea and it's there, and so I will help them just kind of make sure the writing is moving and is accessible. So that I think is something that they should be aware of.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's not a bad thing to sell more copies of your book. I mean, I love that.
Yeah.
Like, there's certain books that I acquire and joyously acquire that I know are only going to sell 500 copies in their life, but they're necessary for the advancement of a field, or they're kind of blowing the lid off something, in a very small way, and those are fine. But for every book like that I publish, I have to publish a couple that, you know, go beyond, like, go beyond. So, I think we'd both agree there's nothing wrong with selling more copies of your book.
Yeah, because I don't like to rule anything out. I don't like to rule anything out because what I really like is a good story and a great idea. And if you're gonna, as Jason said, blow the lid off something, I don't care what discipline it is. If it's going to make me interested, then I know it's going to work. Because I'm not an academic, and so if you can get me interested in your world, and I can, have like a oh my gosh moment, then that means other people will too. I think you were right. Finding common overlap, within your discipline, or if there's a book that you really admire, finding out who that agent is. And I would go to a range also of like very, very kind of old veteran agents, as well as younger and hungrier ones. A range of them is important because we're all at different points in our career. From year to year, it could be, sometimes some agents are just too busy to take on anything, and you'll go to, a colleague of theirs or someone, a few blocks away who's hungry and looking to take it on and sees your book and is willing to work with you. And I mean, there's a dirty secret where most agents don't, there's a lot of agents who live in the middle of the country and have New York City addresses and nobody knows, yeah. There's an agency that I will not name who not a single agent actually lives in New York. And there is a New York office that is like, they kind of come in there they take meetings because all the publishers are still there, but none of them actually live in New York. It's just not affordable. So no, that should not, yeah. And working from home is also not a bad thing.
I actually have a question. Can I ask questions too? So I have a question for Rachel. What how far along do you expect an academic author to be in turning their book into a trade book before you're willing to take a chance on it? Have you looked at really scholarly book proposals and said, I see a trade book here and worked on it, or do you expect an author to go most of that length?
No, I mean, sometimes, actually, I'm talking with someone now, and he's at University of Richmond, and he wrote an amazing Washington Post op-ed. And and then he was actually on 60 Minutes as just like one of their talk, the producer just tracked him down because he wrote the op-ed, and he's only written academic books. And I'm talking with him about doing a trade book, and and it's an example where he's done his tenured book, he's got his tenure. And he wasn't looking. I mean, I just kind of got in touch with him because I thought he had some important things to say about Charlottesville and monuments, and so he hasn't written a word for me. But I've seen him writing for newspapers and other, seen him talking to a general, viewership. It doesn't have to be 60 Minutes, NPR, anything. And if you sense that they are able to communicate, then that's enough for me. I don't need to even read a proposal. I mean, I might not work out, but it's a good thing that, I mean, it's enough for me to get in touch with them and see if they have an idea.
Almost exactly what happened with Carol Anderson. She had an op-ed.
Yeah, well, I learned from Rob.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's basically how agents are really, we're looking everywhere. We're not just looking at our slush piles. So.
I think that's really true for editors too, and that's kind of a piece of advice I always give to authors is obviously publishing within your home, your disciplinary journals and things like that are really important and key. But just getting your voice out there in a different way, op-eds, NPR contribution, popular magazine. It conveys to me that that you already have some experience writing for a larger audience than just your kind of discipline.
Yeah, and exactly. And I will even sometimes, if I'm reading like a Slate article and they're interviewing like a psychologist who's got this great idea, I will dig a little bit and see what they've published and what it looks like. And if it feels like that they have like the seed of something that I could, turn into a trade book, I'll be in touch with them. He was young. It was more, and the same thing with the publisher. We sold it to Bloomsbury. He was like 25 and he won like this $250,000 Princeton grant, and he's at Harvard where he's like defining the systems biology department. I mean, he's like the first in the department's just started, and we were investing in him to some degree, but he also had just through these great stories kind of walks you through what it is and why it's important for us as humans to know. Again, he's answering the thing. He's kind of addressing the what do I need to know about myself question. So enough people. I mean, unfortunately, it did not do that well, but he did a very good job at telling people why they need to understand this new way of looking at the body. So, but that could have easily gone with a university press that had a little more of a trade bent to it. It just went to Bloomsbury too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean it in a political sense. I mean it I think what I have noticed is that individual authors, especially of first-time books that are going to be their tenure books, are increasingly, because of the anxiety within the academy around shrinking tenure lines, um, authors are under increasing pressure to to look for to look for publishers in a conservative way, to go only for the main, you know, the big press in your field is the way to go. And leaving aside any sort of personal connections that you make with editors, or an editor who truly believes in your book, and wants to promote it as a trade book, but this other press is larger in your field, or our tenure and promotion committees feel more comfortable with these sets of publishers. And it really takes a lot of, I mean, I've seen it happen anecdotally, where the agency is totally removed on the part of the author, and they don't get to publish with the publisher that they want to publish with, because they're being pressured into other kinds of arrangements in order to solidify that sort of tenure, that tenure case. So that's kind of what I'm talking about as sort of conservatism. It's really about where books are placed within the larger um, ecosystem around presses within certain academic fields. Mhm.
Um, so for me, a saleable book proposal is the goal. The goal is for me to be able to send it out to 15 to 20 editors, and for one or more of them to immediately say, "This is a book. I see it. It's right here. It just, it just needs to be written. I just got to give them some money and they'll write it." That really is what a proposal needs to do. If they're basically all getting 1 million of these a day, and the default is that they're going to pass. And so you have to tell them that this is like something that they need to buy. So it's a long process. I would take it step by step with my writers. It's typically, they're all important sections, but the overview is extremely important because it really sets out the intention of the book, and it shows who the market is. It tells, it explains why the book needs to be written. And throughout all of that, it also gives the hook at the pitch. And within all of that, though, it's written really well, and it's inviting editors in. It's, giving you a sense. It's doing so much on so many levels, because it's also giving you, it's telling them who you are and what the book is and how this is how it's going to be written, and this is my voice. And the chapter outline is also very, very important, because it's really, you've researched it out enough that you can show that you've got something there. And also implying that there's just so much more that you can say when you get your book deal, when you get your 12 to 18 months to write the book. So it's a question that we all grapple with, which is how much researching out you do for the proposal, and there is a lot that has to be done on spec. So it does really depend on kind of where you are in your research process. If you've already know everything you're going to write about the book, that's great. If it's something that you're kind of in the midst of researching, then you're going to have to ask editors to kind of take a flyer on you, but you really need to make sure that they feel good about doing that. There's a marketing section, which I think people should be working on before they even start their book idea, because within the marketing section is your comparative titles or comp titles. And really what that is you're pointing to books that have worked in your market, in your category, in your market, your genre, and you're saying, my book is like that one, but it's also going to do this that nobody else has done. And where ideally, if I'm working with you, we're working to find the most successful in that group. So, we're going to we can't necessarily point to Steven Pinker, but we'll find somebody who's like Steven Pinker, and they'll have sold, 25,000 copies in hardcover, and we'll use that as a comp title. And then when we send that proposal out to editors and they love it, and they have to then sell it to their ed board, they will say, like, this book is actually like this book, and look how many copies that book sold. And that's how they're going to generate their offer for you. So comp titles are important because it's going to give you a sense of how big this book is going to be, but it's also something for you to read first so that you really know kind of what you should be doing. It's almost like it's almost like a crib sheet, you know? Like, this is how they structure it. This is the little techniques they use. This is the narrative device we can try. So comp titles are hugely important for a book. If all you can find out on the market are books that have, you know, gone and sold like, not, I feel horrible, but, you know, just sold a few hundred copies, like, chances are that's just not gonna be something that a larger publisher is gonna want. So basically, it's a very involved document. People can take, you know, a year writing it, but it's got to be good because it's really your only way in.
All right, so you had asked about peer review. I'll give you. I'm kind of a peer review traditionalist, so my opinion might be a little bit controversial. I actually think the peer review that university presses undertake is a really, really good system that I'm very hesitant to see change within the digital environment. The peer review process is probably the most serious part of my formal consideration of a book manuscript. I choose peer readers really carefully. I expect detailed, 3 to 6 page reports. They're not a thumbs up or a thumbs down for me in terms of taking a book project on. I talk over the phone with my authors about the reports, what makes sense, what was off base. I tell them what I think was off base, and from that we come up with a revision plan. It's a very different process than journal article peer reviews, which, from what I've heard, typically are thumbs up or thumbs down, or write it the way I want you to write it and resubmit it. It's just a lot more of a discursive process when you're talking about a book manuscript. And I have brought projects before my faculty board for contract approval that had reports that recommended rejection, that said this wasn't worth publishing. But because, and sometimes that confirms for an author that they're actually doing what they want to do with their book, right? Especially if it's a field changing book. So, I have seen models of open peer review. To be perfectly honest, I don't think that the reviews that happen in open peer review match the one-sided blind peer review that university presses do. We have experimented at Minnesota with a combination. So we published a couple books that had both open peer review and closed press-controlled peer review. But I think, and those have worked out really successfully. They both generated very different sets of critiques and comments. But I think I'm going to double down and hold on to my peer review process. I think it's one that's worth preserving even as we go forward into digital publishing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it goes through waves of intensity. When you're working on a proposal together, it's fairly interactive. I mean, like I said, I'll take them step by step, each section, um, to just make sure it's honed as well as it can be. Um, when it comes time to actually submit it, I feel like we work in two different worlds. Like, we don't even overlap at all. But when I send it out to, like 15 or 20 editors, we're in touch. I mean, I'm in touch with. I'm representing the author, so I'm brokering everything for them. I'm there. I make sure that it's their work, so I'm making sure they know everything that's happening. They have the submission list. I'm sending them responses in whatever way is going to keep them sane. Sometimes they want them as they come in. Sometimes they just don't want to see any passes until it's all over. In that respect, it's, for them, it's a total emotional roller coaster because they just, sometimes there's a flash of interest in an editor who then can't get support and passes on it. And in that respect, the relationship, I'm basically a guidance counselor and a psychologist. Then if we're lucky enough to sell the book and we get ourselves a book deal, there's or up to that point, there's kind of a huge amount of counseling and guidance and discussing kind of what I know about the editor and what I think can be offered. If there's options, if there's a few different publishers, I'm telling them what I know about who I've worked with and whether I'm, suspicious of the publicity team or the marketing team, or I know an editor, I wouldn't send to an editor that I don't respect, but it's hard to find the perfect house. Everything has its drawbacks. So I'm going to let them know everything I know about about that industry, and they're going to figure out who they had the best connection with. So it's very intensive. And then once the book is sold, I'm still there. I'm still advocating and making sure that they get what they need. But I step back a bit, especially during the writing process. If they're going to take a year to write it, we're not talking every day. Our relationship just goes a little more dormant. And then it picks back up again once the book's delivered and we're kind of dealing with edits, and then we're working with the marketing, and then marketing and publicity conversations start. And then I'm very much in it because I know how things should go, and usually first-time writer has no idea how things should go, and they have no idea if anybody's doing their job right. So that's when I'm very much involved, and I'm making sure no balls are being dropped. I mean, publicists are working on dozens. Some of these publishers are working on dozens of books at a time, and you have to really fight to make sure your book's being taken care of over there. An agent is more and more so hugely important to just process and making sure that it's just getting looked after over there, and it's going to get as much review attention as it can. It's going to get the just promotion lined up. So it's it's a forever relationship really, unless we don't choose to work together after that book. But ideally, all of my writers have continued on with me beyond their first book. Oh, it's expected that this will be a lifelong love fest, and we'll all get along forever, and everybody's going to be great. And I have that with a lot of them. I mean, some of it's varying degrees of some of them I've gone to their weddings, and it's just of course we'll be working together forever. And sometimes there's some people who who really have their career calculated, and they decide they want to be with a William Morris Endeavor agency, and so they've decided they're just moving on for whatever reason. I mean, they're told certain things about the world, and they're going to trust other people. So in that respect, some people have it in their mind that it's a career climbing thing to move from agent to agent, but they do manage to. It's a small world, so reputations definitely get solidified. But for the most part, it's nowadays an agent is really with their writer for the duration. It's depressing. I mean, it's really the publicity, and actually, I'm in a little agents group, and we were just doing that. We had this big email thread about how awful publicity and marketing is, unless a publisher has decided that your book is a lead title for their season. You really are not going to get what you need from the publisher, and it's so pretty much up to the author to take their own resources and make it work. And that alone is a huge reason why publishers are buying writers with platform. And platform is now really they want the author to be doing as much in terms of promoting and marketing the book as them. They see their author more as partners in terms of getting all that done.
And that's long before the pub days.
Yeah.
That's years before the pub days.
Platform is ideally why they want to buy a book. I mean,
so when you were developing your proposal,
part of the proposal is also proving that you have a platform. Yes, yes. When it comes time to talking about marketing and publicity for your specific book, that happens. I'd say 6 months out. You got to start, and I have to make sure that conversation starts. Otherwise, they'll know it probably won't happen. In some houses, everybody's so overworked and underpaid. And publicists, publicists and publishing houses, they're not paid as much as PR reps at another company. They do it for the love of the book, but there's just not a lot of money in it for them. So, yeah. So platform really does depend on who you are as the writer. So at its base level, let's say you have managed to accumulate, 100,000 followers on Twitter because you're really engaging and you've managed to figure out a way to dispense your information to a general audience, and you've done it in a really humorous way, and somebody decided to retweet you, and suddenly you have a huge platform on Twitter. It sounds horrible, but that really is a big deal because it means when the book's ready to come out, you have an audience of you don't have 100,000 sales guaranteed, but you have a percentage of that amount of that people who will buy your book. And publishers like to see that. They have a base sense of how many copies they'll be able to sell of your book. So that's one kind of platform, like kind of just a social media platform. There's also just as an academic, you can have your own platform if you are networked and respected, and you kind of do overlap into some of the trade writers who admire and respect you. Then you're building a platform to that degree too. Anything that you can point to tell publishers you have X number of book buyers in your world who will buy your book. That's what a platform is.
Actually, that's what was going through my head when Rachel was talking, is that academics have platforms too. We may not call them platforms, but
It's a really, really obnoxious word.
but certainly your presence in the field is what I pay attention to. I look at CVs, I see where your work has been published. I look to see, every discipline has crossover journals or blogs that speak, that translate, disciplinary work into a broader audience. I check out your presence on those. I do look for academic authors who have a Twitter following, do have audio clips of interviews they've given on public radio, so I can hear how they talk about their work, and how well they're able to translate their work to a non-academic audience. So yeah, those are all factors for work that I take on too.
There's a large question about how much social media actually translates into book sales, and I think what we've kind of settled on now is that it's more engagement with your followers, and that really is important to them actually wanting to pay $27 to $30 for your book. That's what it really comes down to, is do people want to pay money to buy your book? And you need to get a lot of them to do that.
If we didn't want you to contact us, we wouldn't have that on there. I work with I work on maybe 2 to 3 agented books a year. So, the majority of the books that I acquire are relationships directly with authors. I do like to see manuscripts come in the door. Sometimes it's just another way for me to kind of cover my bases. So yeah, if you can find my email address, you can email me. Usually, for me in academic publishing, a query letter is enough for me to say, yeah, this is potentially interesting, or no, we don't actually publish this kind of book at all. What really matters for me is seeing a fully fleshed out book proposal and a couple sample chapters. Yeah, that's usually the point at which I can make a determination, actually, other than just say, yes, this looks good, show me more. You can start with a query letter. Most people choose to be in touch when they actually have a proposal and sample chapters. Yeah, query letters I'll read quickly and respond, yeah, this looks potentially good or not, but I'll typically forget about them until I see something, you know, tangible. Yeah. Usually the proposal
way.
is yeah, included with a cover letter. Yep.
Well, thank you both.